Debate day dominated by the PM's D-Day departure. Penny Mordaunt says the decision to skip the main international commemoration in Normandy was very wrong. Where does it leave the election campaign now? Welcome to Newsnight, live each weeknight with interviews and insights on another big political night. With us tonight, Cleo Watson, the author and former Downing Street Deputy Chief of Staff under Boris Johnson, Luke Trill, pollster and director of More in Common, and John Riley, the former head of Sky News, who brought Leaders' debates to our screens. We'll also speak live to the Northern Ireland Secretary and Labour's Deputy Campaign Coordinator. First, a taste of how the D-Day row made its way into tonight's debate.
Respect our veterans, including those with the average age of 100 who were deserted by the Prime Minister in Normandy yesterday, which I think was a complete and utter disgrace and shows us we actually have a very unpatriotic Prime Minister. It was dreadful.
But Penny Mordaunt, can you respond to that? Rishi Sunak leaving the D-Day commemorations before the end of the day?
What happened was completely wrong, and the Prime Minister has rightly apologised for that, apologised to veterans, but also to all of us, because he was representing all of us. I'm from Portsmouth. I've also been Defence Secretary, and my wish at the end of this week is that all of our veterans feel completely treasured.
Well, Nick joins us. There's a lot moving on the debate, on D-Day, on the manifestos as we go on air tonight. But let's just deal with that D-Day issue. You know, what make it make sense, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. You know, from what you heard today from the Prime Minister, what happened and where's this going?
Well, the facts are that Rishi Sunak was not there for the whole D-Day commemorations. He was there for what he called the British bit, but he wasn't there for the international bit. That's the famous picture where David Cameron was with the French President, the German Chancellor and the President of the United States. He wasn't there for that bit. It appeared initially that he wasn't there because he came home to record an interview with ITV in which he denied that he was a lawyer in the row over a liar in that row over the £2,000 figure. The Downing Street response to that was, well, this itinerary was fixed some time ago, so it's not quite as it appears. To which many in the Conservative Party say, and your point is precisely what? Yes, your point is that you decided that you didn't need to be there for every nanosecond of this hugely significant and emotional event that every Prime Minister has been at.
And does that make, I mean, you allude to it, does that make sense, that argument? Is it any better that he didn't mean to
yes,
before the general election?
I suppose the thinking in Downing Street is that deals with the idea that he sort of hurried back to sort of make a political interview. But the bottom line is, it is confirming that Rishi Sunak did not think that it was necessary for him to be there all the way through. And what did we have from tonight with Penny Mordaunt? We had Penny Mordaunt disowning Rishi Sunak. She said, as we saw in that clip, it was completely wrong. And just in case we didn't quite hear that, she said it was very wrong. And interestingly tonight, Matthew Parris in The Times, who has always defended Rishi Sunak, describes his column as the last safe haven for Rishi Sunak. Headline, is it too late for Sunak to fall on his sword? Saying the Prime Minister has blown it, how people in the Conservative Party will be thinking, can we get rid of Rishi Sunak before the general election? Matthew Parris strongly doubts that will happen. He thinks Rishi Sunak will lead the party into the general election. But the fact that's even being talked about by Matthew Parris.
Claire, can you make sense of what we've seen, of the facts of this?
I mean, Downing Street will have been planning this for months. An 80-year anniversary is coming at you from 80 years in advance, so you do have plenty of time to work these things out. I can understand how when you're in the thick of a campaign, sometimes you can't see the woods for the trees, so you'll think, oh, we'll do this ITV interview with Paul Brand, and you won't necessarily think, oh, that's on the same day as D-Day. But, you know, from just a campaigning point of view, taking out, you know, morally or what is the right thing that you should be doing, you want Conservative voters to see you with the royal family and the armed forces. Those are two things they really, really mind about.
Hit in the middle of the campaign.
And the one advantage Rishi Sunak has over Keir Starmer at the moment is he looks prime ministerial because he is the prime minister. So he can be there in the frame with Joe Biden and Emmanuel Macron, and he wasn't. So it is quite hard to make sense of, and I wonder whether it's just some of, it's not going brilliantly, the Conservative campaign, and I wonder whether this was just an opportunity to try and fix something and slightly losing sight of what they're really trying to achieve here.
Let's remind ourselves of some of the things that's happened on this issue over the past 24 hours.
Can't believe the enormity of such a huge gaffe.
He's proved to me that he basically is not a patriotic leader of the Conservative Party.
I think people will just be incredulous and he's not fit to be Prime Minister.
I think it's a tribute to the way he is, that, he thought on reflection, he wished he'd stayed in France.
He just went home. He's completely misread it.
I thought it was really important for me to be there.
I think it's political malpractice of the highest order.
Now, Rishi Sunak will have to answer for his own actions.
Doesn't believe in the country, its people, its history.
And he had a long-standing plan to return after that.
Your actions freed a continent and built a better world.
Not interested. Didn't need to apologise one little bit. It's just people making a mountain out of a molehill.
You risked everything, and we owe you everything. Over the past 2 days, I've participated in a number of events in Portsmouth and France to honour those who risked their lives to defend our freedom and our values 80 years ago. And having participated in all the British events with British veterans, I returned home before the International Leaders event later in the day. On reflection, that was a mistake, and I apologise.
Big apology there, John. Might we have had the seminal moment of this election campaign already?
I think we probably have. Elections are made up of moments. It reminds me of April the 1st, 1992, Kinnock at the Sheffield rally, a week out from the poll, when Major in fact won. Kinnock blew it at the rally. Gordon Brown, Gillian Duffy in Rochdale, April 2010. This was a big moment. We live in an era of instant visual storytelling. That one picture got the President of the United States, the Chancellor from Germany, the President of France. Then you've got beside him the former MP of Whitney, the current Foreign Secretary. Not a good look. What it says to me is the people around him, the teenage scribblers at number 10, are not thinking hard enough about the pictures of the campaign. Or, as well, what was the conversation that went on between the current Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, where Mr. Cameron ended up standing next to those presidents? I'd like to know what that exchange was, because Cameron, he's an astute politician. He should have known that.
You'd have seen this in 3D, you'd have imagined.
Well, you'd think
exactly
so.
how this would play out.
I don't think the full story has yet to come out.
Yeah. OK.
John makes a really interesting point, talking about Gillian Duffy with Gordon Brown and the Sheffield rally. Those weren't calculated. When Neil Kinnock went, whoa, and that awful moment for him, that was him getting carried away. Gillian Duffy was a hot mic moment. Gordon Brown didn't plan to say this. This, by Rishi Sunak, was planned. It was planned that he wouldn't be there. It was planned that David Cameron would take his place. You can't just randomly walk up and stand next to the President of the United States. There's a huge amount of protocol. This was absolutely planned.
But in any event, if you want to be Prime Minister, you'd surely want the FaceTime with Zelensky and Zelensky and Macron and Biden.
Particularly because Biden talked about Putin and a threat to European peace, and there's a war going on European soil, and the Prime Minister of the UK doesn't stay. He makes his excuses and leaves.
So, Luke, in terms of something laser-guided at accentuating some of the polling pain the Conservatives have faced, I kind of I can't really imagine anything you could conjure if you were trying to kind of prise open that kind of reform Conservative axis than D-Day veterans upsetting them.
Absolutely. In public opinion terms, I genuinely think this is nothing short of catastrophic for Rishi Sunak. We know the Conservatives are already 20 points behind in the polls. They cannot afford any mistakes, let alone a mistake like this. And the reason it's so catastrophic is because for lots of voters, it reinforces what they already thought about the Prime Minister, that he's out of touch, that he doesn't get it. And having spent the first 2 weeks of the campaign trying to woo back disaffected Conservatives who are threatening to go to reform or threatening to stay home, to do something which that group of voters who tend to be older, they tend to be more invested in the military, in our institutions, to skip the second half of that event and have this row running, I genuinely think is serious political trouble. I think there are very few things I can imagine in a campaign which would have a similar impact.
People were talking about, I don't know, maybe sending Paddington Bear on a flight to Rwanda or something like that. You really couldn't make it up, I suppose, is where we're trying to get at it. If you actually were trying to come up with a development or a headline or
I suppose just with one caveat. How do young voters view D-Day? Does it have the impact, him not being there with the young voters in the same way that...
But he's already lost them. Yeah. He's already lost young voters. Like, this is his base.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yes, it is, exactly.
And you know, obviously we're going to get on to the debate later, but they've seen some of the alternative to if they don't vote Conservative, if you're a Conservative-based voter. And that's just not good for Sunak. If he can't hold the people he can generally depend on, that's where the trouble comes.
He said sorry pretty quickly. Your former boss was difficult to get apologies out of. One might say, I don't know. I mean, and he came out pretty quickly this morning with the sorry. Would that have been painful for him, or was it just... I guess why was that so obvious when it wasn't so obvious not to do it in the first place?
I think it will hurt him because, well, you heard Johnny Mercer talking about this earlier. He does actually care about veterans, and his family spend a lot of time, doing charitable work with veterans and their families. So I think that's why it's such a painful misstep for him personally, because it's actually one of the areas where I think he doesn't generally feel out of touch. So I think it hurts even more. You're right. I think it was a very quick and quite heartfelt apology, and I can see exactly why they've done that. But it came straight away with like a gaffe of being on a veterans' road or whatever it was. Like I just feel like these things keep happening to him. And every time they try and fix something, another accident, it's like a butterfly effect. There are ripples into something else, and it's just so hard for them to be able to stop and pause. And you're talking about this on Newsnight for the second night in a row, and it's an important ceremony, but it is a ceremony in many ways completely unconnected to the general election. But these things just keep happening that it just seems to be very difficult to kind of hold on to.
What did you make of how it played out in the debate? I noticed that Labour were a little bit, Angela Rayner was a little bit reluctant to kind of attack on this, whereas all the other parties were.
I think there is a danger for Labour if they were seen to be politicising this directly. I mean, far better from a Labour strategy point of view to let this play out, because, to be honest, you don't need the attack line as an opposition politician. More interesting was Penny Mordaunt, of course, who really was very clear, as Nick was saying, that this was not just a mistake, it was wrong that this happened.
Very wrong.
And I think that was an eye on her own future in Portsmouth. She might not hold a seat, but also an eye to the future, because we expect if she does hold that seat, she's likely to be one of the candidates to succeed Rishi Sunak if the Conservatives lose the election.
And interestingly, Penny Mordaunt did not confront Nigel Farage in that debate at all. She knew
it's like he wasn't there.
She knew exactly what he'd be doing, attacking her on this. So hold back.
Right. And do you think Farage was surprised by the capital? Well, no, not surprising that he tried to make capital out of it. But do you think he will be successful in that?
Yeah, I think he will. I thought he was quite clever tonight. He was impish.
Right.
He didn't really play the part that everyone else played. He sort of stood aside and let them talk about the election. But he was impish throughout. I thought Rayner was surprisingly subdued throughout the whole debate.
Okay.
And yet again, Labour hasn't come up with a definitive response to the £2,000 claim. They haven't got a form of words that they should have worked out since Tuesday night that she says, hold on a moment, let's kill this as a lie. That hasn't happened yet in this election.
Do you know there was a very interesting strategic decision taken by Labour on how Angela Rayner would handle that? Because you looked at it, and we all know about that, and she didn't knock it on the head, and you go, why not? The decision they made was let BBC verify make that point. Let Michel Hussein make that point. Step back, because they believe that would be much more effective than having Angela Rayner saying that's absolutely outrageous. That was a deliberate calculation.
We will pick up the more general debate issues in a moment, but we can now speak to Chris Heaton-Harris, Northern Ireland Secretary, and Ellie Reeves, Labour's Deputy National Campaign Director. Chris, can you imagine anything kind of more toxic than disrespecting D-Day veterans, whether or not it's in the middle of an election campaign?
So, I mean, I agree with Penny. You know, he got it wrong. He made a mistake. I'm very pleased he apologised very quickly for that. And, you know, Penny this evening did go on to make the point. Actually, the questioner was asking a point about defence spending. The reaction about D-Day actually came from the panellists
Yes.
that we saw.
And you can't be playing this down into
not in the slightest. What I'm saying is there was another question in there, which is actually equally a fundamental, important question about the credibility of national security under Labour.
The last living commemoration. I mean, you've been a chief whip. You know how the inner workings of a party function. It doesn't sound like something's
You're giving credit to me that I don't. I shouldn't necessarily.
Something's not going right there.
It was a mistake.
Yeah.
And
whose mistake, though? I mean, I listened very carefully to what the Prime Minister said, and he seemed to be sort of blaming some sort of Google Calendar official got something wrong. That seemed to be what he was saying, but actually there was a conscious decision not to attend the international part of this commemoration.
I think the Prime Minister said he made a mistake and he apologised for it.
What was the mistake? It was according importance to the most amazing piece of international,
I mean, they were incredible pictures, and it was incredible.
Why would you want to miss that? I don't get that.
Yeah,
help me here.
Well,
help us all.
I'm not sure I can. I think he made a mistake. He's admitted he's made a mistake, and there isn't much more to say about it because I don't know. I'm not in charge of anybody's Google Calendar. I can't even get mine under control. Okay. So.
Well, hang on. He's saying don't politicise it. But I put it to you that voters have every right to judge the Prime Minister and your party on what he's demonstrably chosen to prioritise.
So I completely agree. The voters have every right to choose on whatever issue they choose to vote on. And as a number of people would have told you already, not a single vote has been cast yet. But this was a mistake. He got it wrong, and he has apologised. And there's really not much more I can say on
Well, OK, if you're an under 18 that has been lectured by the PM on duty just a week ago, and now he does this, how do you persuade an under 18 on their national duty when the Prime Minister goes missing?
Firstly, a general election is about a whole host of moments, and this was a bad one for us and for the Prime Minister. But we have there are a whole host of other moments.
Well, there are some other moments. I mean, you were with him by the Titanic. There was the raining lack of umbrella outside number 10.
Please go careful on the rejuvenation of the Titanic Quarter in Northern Ireland, which is now creating thousands of jobs and demonstrates how far a place can come.
OK, you can have that one then. Yeah. Let's talk about Downing Street. And this is not the only event like this. Let's just put it like that. Do you sense the grip on your campaign? Is the campaign going well, Chris?
Oh yeah, the campaign could go better, and I'm hoping it will do in the future. But as a humble Secretary of State, just trying to do his job and go around the country and support our candidates, getting on the doors, talking to people is how you actually win votes, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Have you spoken to the Prime Minister?
I haven't spoken to the Prime Minister. We've exchanged messages actually.
And how do you sense he's reacting to what's happened?
Well, he knows today. He knows he's made a mistake, and that it's obviously a factor in the general election campaign that he didn't want to have.
How would it? I mean, it is the most. If you could pick a topic that would, most damage a campaign, it would surely be D-Day veterans being disrespected.
So I don't know, but he obviously did not mean to disrespect D-Day veterans in the slightest.
There's many of them.
And he attended a vast part of this ceremony. He missed the international part. That was a mistake. Yeah. He has apologised for it. But in a campaign, you can only move forward.
Yeah.
Actually,
there is one last substantive point here, which is that he seemed to say, "I attended the British part, and that's all we need to do. But the international part, we can just let that go." What does he even mean by that?
No,
D-Day was the most extraordinary international moment.
I think that's a factual statement.
Okay, right. That seemed to be the hint. I mean, I'm trying to understand what he was trying to say. I don't quite...
Well, you have to ask him, Faisal, because I wasn't there. I'm not.
You're his representative tonight on Newsnight.
And he's apologised, and we would like, obviously, to concentrate on other topics in the campaign.
Let's bring in Ellie Reeves. It hasn't been the smoothest of campaigns. You're the deputy coordinator of this campaign. It hasn't been the smoothest start to your campaigns, have you? There's deselection rows. We've managed to try and deselect or fail to deselect. You've got your MPs now, but it hasn't gone super smoothly for your party either.
Well, we've got our candidates in place for the election. I think a number of Conservative candidates had to be replaced at the very last minute before close of nominations today. We've got a fantastic set of candidates going forward into the general election. I'm very proud of each and every one of them.
I guess, what does it say about your party that there were some deselections at the end? Some of the people that deselected ended up having their own cushy, safe seats. I mean, what does that say about how your party's run?
Well, we always go through a process of endorsing candidates to go forward for the general election, and we do expect the highest of standards from our candidates, and it's right that people that stand for office on a Labour platform have the highest standards, and we endorsed our list earlier this week to go forward.
Is it not a bit strange that members of your NEC that decide these seats end up with cushy, safe seats? Is that a well-functioning, democratically run party?
Well, we have a long tradition of having, fantastic members of our party on the National Executive Committee, but also where there are vacancies that arise days out from a general election, we have to have a process for selecting candidates, and that process is that the NEC interview candidates and decide on them.
And you're happy that Diane Abbott is now a Labour candidate? You'll be fully backing her?
Yes, absolutely.
OK, right. Both of you, we saw the debate tonight, and the smaller parties landed some blows on you in terms of honesty about taxation. I put it to you, whichever of you end up in Cabinet in a month's time, you'll be raising taxes, as the IFS point out to by the autumn.
So I think as night follows day, if Labour get into government, you'll get taxes galore. Today we had an unfunded tax commitment that Angela Rayner said about the 2.5% spend on defence. Now that's not Labour's, hasn't up until now been Labour's position, because they've always said when money allows. So there's another unfunded commitment that's been made, which is a huge one. You look at the Great British Energy. That's just going to be piling, well, it seems like an empty vessel that's going to pile money on people's bills going forward and not produce 1 volt of energy. So there's a whole host of things here. But the IMF have pointed out that our economy is set to grow. Okay. As you know, as a good economics man, faster than most in the G7 in the coming 5 years.
Well, we've been clear that we won't raise national insurance, we won't raise income tax, and we won't raise VAT. All of our plans are fully costed and fully funded. You gave the example of the example of Great British Energy, paid for by a proper windfall tax on the gas and oil companies who have been making record profits. Every commitment that we make.
Is it going to produce any energy?
Look, it will invest in the energy of the future, in green energy, helping us to achieve net zero energy by 2030. And it will crowd in private investments.
I think you'll find it will crowd out private investment.
It will crowd in private.
OK, so there's some claims and counterclaims over what's actually going to be in the manifestos or not, and all will be revealed this week, we hope. But you are both signed up to what, I don't know, viewers maybe don't expect or know about, which is an £11 billion tax rise through the freezes in the income tax thresholds for 3 years. That's an £11 billion tax rise. That's more than a penny, and you're both signed up to that. So from now, after the election, the truth is both of you are going to raise taxes.
But we believe the economy is growing and inflation is dropping. Interest rates will start to go in the right direction, and there'll be an opportunity to cut more taxes. And we also, we've chosen to do it through national insurance because it's the quickest way to get money into people's pockets. Now £900 in this current year. So we believe there is a strong fiscal plan there. But
do you really think the public's listening? Because you made a series of pledges in 2019 which were quite similar, and they were and you don't say you've broken those pledges, and yet taxes have spiralled higher and higher, 4 or 5 percentage points of GDP.
Facing the highest tax burden in 70 years. People are paying more in their mortgages.
There was a pandemic where hundreds of billions of pounds was spent to support this country, its people and its businesses.
But what about the mini budget that crashed the economy, leaving people paying more in their mortgages?
The tens of millions of pounds that was support on for people's energy bills. There have been, I think it's fair to say, some other factors that have come and not what we.
I guess my point is, when you make these sorts of pledges to the public, and both of you are making these pledges, the public will see that you made some pledges, and you say you've stuck to those pledges, and yet the tax burden's gone higher and higher for whatever reason. So why do you think they're even going to listen to these pledges? Do you think they are actually listening?
So I think you're not giving the public enough credit, because I believe they truly do, or the ones that vote certainly do. And they'll question us, and they'll question Labour, and they'll question the other parties. I mean, the Green Party candidate tonight, just in the health bit, committed an extra £70 billion to the NHS. These are, meaty chunks that mean spending elsewhere doesn't get. There's only so much.
You mentioned mortgage rates. It was Liz Truss bingo I could hear basically from Angela Rayner tonight. But are you saying that if Labour had been in power over the past 2 or 3 years, the Bank of England would not have raised interest rates? Sure, it would have been the same.
We wouldn't have crashed the economy with that mini
last
budget.
time you were in government, you absolutely crashed the economy.
There was a global economic crash. This was a mini budget that had unfunded tax cuts and spending commitments in it, and it sent the market spiralling. That's what sent interest rates rocketing.
One last question to you, Ellie. Are you worried about the message to your, if you like, left-wing, progressive wing, the Greens, people more concerned maybe about what's going on in the Middle East, people who are concerned about Brexit? What's your offer for them? They were sort of chipping away at you in that debate today.
This is an election about change. We've had 14 years of the Conservatives mismanaging the economy, failing our public services. That's why, for example, in our first steps, we've talked about the 6,500 specialist teachers that we'll recruit.
We've done the 6 steps. I'm asking about your sort of left-wing hinterland. I mean, basically, are the Green Party going to end up doing what Nigel Farage has done to the Conservative Party?
No, I don't think
Labour?
so. I don't think so. I'm on doorsteps across the country, and the response is positive, but not a single vote has been cast yet, and we're working hard, and we're not complacent at all.
And less than four weeks now till that day. Thanks very much for joining us there, Chris Eaton-Harris and Ellie Reeves. Debate tonight was a big moment, not just, as we were hearing, for Tories and Labour, but 5 other parties too, and often their leaders aimed their fire, as we were hearing, not at Rishi Sunak, but at Labour. Here's a flavour of what Angela Rayner faced.
You've just said that we need a strong economy. You backed Liz Truss and crashed our economy. You made people like me redundant when we were in the home care service.
Even Liz Truss, on her worst day, still recognised that we need a nuclear deterrent in this country, Angela.
And so do I. And so do I.
You need to ignore the snake oil salesman who delivered Brexit, and you need to challenge the Labour Party and the Conservative Party about why they aren't seeking to rejoin the single market, why they aren't seeking to double down on making sure that we return to freedom of movement, and why we aren't investing in our renewables future.
And our exports are at a record high.
The NHS has been chronically underfunded for decades. It's on its knees. This cannot be allowed to continue. Most of us agree about that. But the answer is not, as the Conservatives and, surprisingly, Labour think, to invite big multinational companies further into our National Health Service.
When Tony Blair came in, at least there was a feeling of something different happening. I'm just not sensing that, which is why we in Plaid Cymru say the Tories are gone, Labour are going to come into power, but let's, for goodness sake, make sure that people who feel ignored, as you do, are heard by that Labour Party when they came in.
This Parliament has been characterised by law-breaking, by lying, and by the economic illiteracy of the mini-budget. And of all the things that the Conservatives have broken, the worst thing that I think they've broken is people's hope.
Do you remember going back on the tuition fees pledge?
That's that's a sore subject for us for sure.
So, Nick, there was a few different sort of sports going on one stage.
There were indeed. I mean, obviously 7 parties, and we're now focusing on the 5. So you had Plaid Green and the SNP. They had their target on the Labour Party. Liberal Democrat David Cooper on the Conservatives. And Nigel Farage, well, he had everyone in his sights because he wants to bring a revolt against the establishment, as he calls it, but obviously he's particularly keen to basically do as much damage as he can do to the Conservative Party in this general election. So, 5 floors below where we are right now, I was in the BBC spin room and I caught up with some of the luminaries from those 5 parties.
We've seen 14 years of Conservative austerity and underinvestment in our public services, and a Labour Party who are not offering any opposition. I think that's exactly what we saw on stage. Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt bickering over what just felt unimportant. As Carla said, it was just undignified. But then you had the Green Party, who were there with real hope, real change, offering genuine solutions to the problems people are facing right now.
Stephen did exceptionally well there. I think his aim was to get across the difference between the SNP and the Labour Party, and to paint the Labour Party as basically the same as the Tories. And he did that incredibly well tonight. You know, he was able on Trident, on austerity, on Brexit, to really push the points that aren't being talked about by Labour or the Tories in this election, that they are trying to brush over. And you could tell he was resonating with the audience. He was getting a lot of claps. He was getting a lot of support.
It showed why we need Plaid Cymru MPs in Westminster, that we have a positive vision for our communities, and also showed the stark contrast to the Westminster politics of the 2 parties, and showing people that they have a choice as well. It's not a binary choice between Conservative or Labour, so that people actually can vote and know that they'll have strong representatives in Westminster fighting for fairness, fighting for equality. And I'm glad he also put Nigel Farage in his place, because that needed doing.
I think it went very well. I think she was right to keep out of the slanging match, and she used her time to put forward our policies, particularly around the NHS and social care, in a really human way. I think she came across as a real person, as opposed to some of the more political people around the table.
Look, Nigel's the only one that isn't a robot, right? He talks in a language that people understand, and he connects with the public. And I said this earlier, when he is in Clacton, for example, people treat him like he's a hero, hanging off bridges. You saw it yourself. So there is something deeply strange happening in the political world at the moment. And actually, I think Nigel made some great points.
David Bull there, wasn't it, from the Reform Party? Doctor. Luke, we have some breaking news from your polling organisation about that debate.
We have, in the past few minutes, just closed a poll of Debate Watchers, which finds that the winner of the debate, according to viewers, was Nigel Farage with 25%, followed by Angela Rayner on 19%, followed by none of the above on 14%, with the others bringing up the rear. We also asked in that poll who out of Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt would make the best Conservative leader.
Trouble causes.
And we found that amongst Conservative 2019 voters, they were more than twice as likely to say that Penny Mordaunt would do a better job as Prime Minister than Rishi Sunak.
And won the debate. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that there'll be traffic in terms of who people want to vote for, or do they just sort of hat tip to your performance on the telly box today? What does it mean?
I mean, you've got to remember that the people who'll be watching a debate on a Friday night are probably fairly engaged. They'll probably have made their mind up. But I think Nigel Farage will be happy.
A bit later.
Exactly. But I think Nigel Farage will be quite happy with that 25% because it will keep up some of that momentum he's been building since his announcement earlier this week.
So, John, you were one of the pioneers of these debates, 2010. So, is it offering much? Is it still adding to the Democratic?
Yeah, I think it is in primetime TV on Tuesday night and on tonight, Friday. There's been an hour and a half. On Tuesday it was an hour, too short. Look and discussion about the key issues facing the UK. Having said that, since we ran the campaign in 2010, I think there's been mission creep. So if you remember, in 2010, there were 3 debates. The key thing about it was all the parties came together, the 3 main parties, in the room with the broadcasters and the politicians together, and agreed the format for all 3 debates. And critically, those 3 debates had a single theme: home affairs, foreign affairs, and the economy. Yeah. And I think that meant for a better series of debates. What I still think needs to happen is a commission needs to be set up that runs the debates, takes them out of the squabbling broadcasters, takes them out of the rival parties, and they set it up in advance of the campaign, agree the format, and get on with it.
Yeah. Because they're part of the furniture now for an election.
I think
ironically, in 2010, they may have helped bring about the coalition, which has made them much more complicated to try and organise.
Yeah,
one might
possibly.
Cleo, what did you make about what you saw in tonight's debate? Winners, I mean, who would have been most pleased with their performance and its impact on the election?
Well, I think that after Tuesday, people have sort of forgotten that this isn't actually just a two-way contest, and it was quite refreshing. I mean, partly if you did watch the full hour and a half, it was quite refreshing to hear some different voices in the mix, so you sort of didn't fall asleep quite so much. They are complicated, exactly as John says. It's hard to get all the issues out there at once, but it was quite interesting to see Labour under some strain for the first time, just because they've been able to sit quite tight so far, and they haven't had to answer too many demanding questions on any of the policies they're putting forward so far. I do think that the kind of stars, shall we say, with the best punches were people like Nigel Farage and the Green leader, because they were able to say that you're not getting the change that you want it to be. Yes, this is a change general election, but actually, if you want real change, you need to be looking at one of the more kind of fringe third parties that don't normally get a look in, which I actually think is fair.
And Carla Denny made that very wry comment, didn't she, when Penny Mordaunt was arguing with Angela Rayner?
Yeah. Yeah, and she said, you're not very edifying. And it's sort of true, and it's exactly what we see in the House of Commons chambers all the time. You know, it's the big Prime Minister's questions, and then the other parties get a little bit of a look in at the end. And I suspect, I don't think just off tonight's debate, but I think that the eventual kind of overall vote share we'll see at the end of this general election will see some of these third parties picking up far more votes than they have in previous years.
I think I just have to say that in my entirely impartial BBC manner, I think the moment of the debate was Michelle Hussein when she mentioned tuition fees to Daisy Cooper, and she was just really embarrassed. I mean, the thing about
the historical memory of these things.
Oh, but it's absolutely seared into their memory because they had a devastating result at the 2015 election at the end of the coalition. But look, we journalists, we love these debates because they're very dramatic. There's a great theatre. We're in the spin room. We're trying to be like the Americans. And in many ways, they're quite telling. You know, what did we learn about Rishi Sunak the other day? Well, what we learned is what we learned about him in that Liz Truss debate. Lots of facts. Is he too aggressive? What did we learn about Keir Starmer? The deliberative lawyer was very, very slow to come back on that 2000. Perhaps he didn't know what the 2000 was, or in his lawyerly way, he's cautious. So we love them, their theatre. But you do have to wonder, are they actually going to make any difference to the result of this general election, or indeed any general election? Nick Clegg was popular than Winston Churchill after the 2010 debates. What happened to the Liberal Democrat vote? It went up, seats went down. Although the Liberal Democrats do say that the debates meant that they had a better result than they might otherwise have had, hence coalition.
Can I ask you, though, we've obviously been living in this window where the revolt on the right, partly because of, Cleo's work on the Vote Leave campaign and everything that has transpired after that, and we've seen these ruptures in the right and these fights on the right. Could there be a mirror image of this, Luke, on the left, if the polls are right? You see this argument from the smaller parties, Labour's going to win a massive majority, why don't you lend your vote now to someone you believe in more, which is kind of marrying together with Labour's caution?
I think we've certainly been seeing sort of splinter parties on the left, particularly the Greens, but some of the Gaza independents sort of showing their teeth. We saw that in the local elections. It looks like it's not going to cause Labour major problems in this election, not least because those voters tend to be concentrated in safer Labour seats in the cities, places like that, places with lots of students. But my concern, if I were Labour, would be what happens when they win government. Could the Greens start to play that role the Liberal Democrats used to play under Tony Blair of becoming a repository of disillusioned left-wing voices?
And just quickly, if some of these polls are right, the headline polls and those fancy MRP polls, if they're right, is this being borne out by what all of you are hearing on the ground? Are there very strange true blue seats where we're seeing them thinking, I like Ed Davies' antics, or I like Keir Starmer, in like totally bizarre, unexpected quarters? Are we seeing any of that?
Well, it's not that they like Ed Davey or Keir Starmer particularly, it's that they've fallen so out of love with the Conservatives. We were in Worthing West earlier this week, should be a safe Conservative seat, and they were just saying, we sort of think the Tories have blown it, and that's what's driving it, rather than the other parties having...
Is anyone taking the sort of below 100 sort of event?
Oh, absolutely.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah.
Cleo, you're nodding. I mean, tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth bearing in mind, that, taking a step back from the campaign itself, that a fifth term is genuinely unprecedented. And I remember when we won in 2019, a big majority, the next day being called into a room by Dominic Cummings, and a group of us were told, to win again in 2024, it's going to take a hell of a lot of work. These people have lent us their votes. We need to get, the bulldozers in for these 40 hospitals now. We won't get them built in time, but in 2024, we might have a shot of saying, listen, we've started the work, give us 5 more years to finish the job. And, COVID, as Chris said earlier, COVID has come along, various other problems, but it's hard to believe that the Conservative Party en masse, and I think Rishi Sunak's kind of the fall guy for this, and actually there's a lot of people behind him who've made this happen, have frittered that 80-seat majority away.
Not just frittered. What you started with Vote Leave might end up with the Conservatives, I don't know, below... I mean, what do you think about that as a legacy?
Well, alluded to it earlier.
Is that what you meant?
It's going to be a bizarre leadership contest this summer where, we potentially saw it tonight. There were Conservative Party voters who'll perhaps be thinking, where do I want the soul of the Conservative Party to go? Is it in the kind of Penny Mordaunt direction, or is it in the Nigel Farage direction?
OK.
And that could be happening in a matter of weeks.
We have to leave it here. There was much more I wanted to ask you. There's loads of interesting papers, but we have run out of time for them. And that is all from us for tonight on a big political day. There'll be more of them over the weekend. Manifestos are coming next week, and Kirsty will be here on Monday. Till then, have a very good night and a good weekend.